The Pair of Gloves by Charles Dickens, appreciating the story. The beginning of the story is very eye-catching. It reads like a traditional detective story, but at the end, I find out the murderer is not revealed. I think most of the readers will be a little disappointed with the ending. What do you think of this response?
Well, I think Charles Dickens is one of the earliest writers who uses detectives in his novels and this short story, The Pair of Gloves. I think the fact we don't, initially we don't actually find out, or the person we think must be the murderer, the person who owns a pair of gloves, TR. We find, well, if you read the story, you will find out that the murderer isn't the person we expect.
Right.
So in a way, the fact is an unexpected ending.
Right.
Like many other short story writers, O. Henry, Maupassant, James, and other short story writers at a similar time or a bit later, they like to have a twist of an ending.
Yeah.
So I feel maybe the first time you read it, you want to know who the murderer was, but in some ways this also shows us how police work. This was one of the first early detective ways of trying to solve a crime by evidence.
Right.
And
Okay.
I think this is also probably shows us the real situation for police. They can't always solve the mystery, they can't always solve the murder, and they can't always catch the criminal.
Okay, so it seems that it's not so modern detective story. Modern detective story emphasize the part of very complicated plus, and finally the murderer must be found. But this one seems a little realistic.
Yes,
that's what you mean.
Yes, in some ways, modern murder stories could also end, I guess, without knowing who the murderer was. Although most stories, you want to have the conclusion, finding out, the murderer. I just think, yes, it is a realistic view of police work.
Yes.
And murders in general.
Okay. All right. The second question is, I think the most important and interesting part of the detective story is the process of unraveling the case of a murder. And I think Dickens is quite successful in this part to make a very short detective story complete. What do you think?
Yes, I agree. When you're reading, he gives very strong clues, which are important in all detective stories, and later in some of the great detective story writers like Agatha Christie or Dorothy L. Sayers. Later they were women writers. One of their styles, or one of their ways of building the plot, is giving the reader many different clues. But some of the clues are actually, in English we say red herrings, which means they are leading us on the wrong road.
Right.
So I think in a way, maybe Charles Dickens in this very early story is actually he's one of the first in the English language, in English literature, to write detective stories. And I feel that, in a way, that all the people who followed probably based a lot of their ideas on this, the pair of gloves, and some of the other short stories he wrote about detectives, and also on the other detectives he uses in his big long novels.
Okay, I agree. Yeah, because as I know, the other detective stories emphasize the personality of the detective more than something else.
Yes.
Yeah, so that's why Sherlock Holmes is so famous.
Yeah.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. By the way, what is the difference between inspector and sergeant in UK? Because just in the beginning of the story, the inspector weird.
Weird.
Weird. Yeah, is the policeman who is in charge of the case. Yeah, I'm a little curious about
sergeant
this.
is a lower ranking. In England, we have a constable is the lowest level, and then a sergeant, and then the inspector is a higher level, and then maybe higher chief inspector. But usually, to reach inspector level, you have to have you have to be in the police force for some time, have experience. Also, maybe these days pass a lot of exams.
Oh, okay.
Yes.
So if you are a sergeant, then you have to wear the uniform. If you do your work.
Usually, the sergeant, the constable, they wear the police uniform.
Okay.
Yes.
All right. The next one is, besides the structure of the plot, I'm very interested in the details concerning the lifestyle of the English people in the Victoria age. For example, what kind of person will put on dress gloves when outing, and in a formal occasion, what was the proper outfit for them, as you know?
Well, dress gloves are gloves for men or women who, everyone would probably, if they had any money, would wear gloves in English winter. Because
Really?
England is very cold and quite wet.
Even today?
Even today. And in those days, the poorer people would walk, maybe get a ride on a poorer coach, or if they're farmers, they would have their own maybe cows or horses, but they'd be walking around, and but the richer people would always go by horseback.
Okay.
Cars were not invented at this time, and so everyone would wear gloves anyway to protect themselves from the cold or wet, and maybe falling off the horse. But dress gloves are particularly used for, it was kind of like a fashion item.
Okay.
That people would wear to show, to cover their hands. At that time, a bit like Taiwan in modern times, particularly girls don't like to, get any suntan. They like to keep as white as possible. That was partly the reason. England doesn't have the strong sun like Taiwan, but it was really a fashion item, and it was part of you dress up to go to a party or go outside. It was part of their costume, their clothes.
So when a gentleman goes into a room, usually they will take off the gloves. So that's why the gloves
a very important
left.
item. And also they would take off their hat. The polite thing when you enter a room or the church, you would take off your hat and take off your gloves. So maybe it would be easy, particularly gloves, because maybe you would have many pairs of gloves, like today people have pairs of socks. And, you know, we lose socks in the wash. They would probably forget their gloves because they had many other pairs.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Okay. So, you haven't answered the question. What's the proper outfit for a gentleman, you know, in the Victoria age? I mean, in the old time.
The proper outfit is, I mean, the proper outfit is, you know, with gloves and hat and, you know, a suit of the time. I mean, you have to see pictures of the time. I mean, that was the outfit. I mean, and often, most of the year you would wear a coat because it was raining or it was cold.
My question is, I'm curious about, you know, if different ranks of people wear different types of outfits.
Well, yes and no. I mean, if you look at any of the movies that have been made, you know, based on Charles Dickens' novels. I mean, he's had hundreds, probably as many or more than any other writer, perhaps bar Shakespeare. And if you look at the movie, like, for example, take Oliver Twist, you see that Oliver Twist is mainly about the poor people, thieves and cheats in the street. They actually wear the same clothes as the rich people because they like to mimic whatever is the fashion, poor or rich. Now, the thieves may be able to steal some of their clothes or get them copied cheaply. They wouldn't buy, like today, the rich people would buy a very expensive designer label, and maybe some other people would wear similar kind of fashions, but not with the designer label.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
Or maybe a copy label.
Yeah. Just like the clothes we buy in the Uniqlo.
Or in the night market.
Yeah, right.
Like you get a Chanel bag for 200 NT that would cost 30 or 40,000 NT. I think the same thing was true of London and England and probably anywhere at that time.
Okay, all right. I understand. All right. And then the following question is, I'm also a little confused with the magistrate at Union Hall. What kind of, you know, official? I mean, what kind of job is about the magistrate at the Union Hall?
Well,
does it mean a judge in a local court
yes,
at the present time?
Yeah, basically a magistrate is like, usually they have, a bit like Taiwan, they have usually three magistrates sitting on usually small cases or the first time you hear the case in court. Now if it's a very simple little local case, maybe like someone had maybe painting their house and they spilt some paint on your house. Now, if it's a simple case and they would say, okay, you have to clean the other person's house or repaint their house. Now, often the cases, if they're a bit more difficult, like stealing, where you need a witness, they may need to go to a further court. Then they would have a judge and jury, the 12 members of the jury, and then an official judge who was previously had studied law, became a lawyer, and then moved up and became a judge. But the magistrates usually for local small, you know, disputes, small arguments, and usually they're not official lawyers or really official judges, but maybe they're from the local community, maybe like a head teacher or a doctor or someone who has some free time.
Or maybe the chief of the police office?
Could be, possibly, I'm not sure. It could be, I'm not sure at that time, but today probably not, because then he just deals with the criminals when they've been arrested. He might not be the best person to be a magistrate.
Okay.
Yeah.
And what is the Union Hall?
It's the name of a hall. I don't know if there's any particular meaning in this story. I mean, this, throughout the lifetime of Charles Dickens, in English time we call the Victorian Age.
Yeah.
Charles Dickens lived nearly the same, the whole same period as Queen Victoria. And at this age there were a lot of changes in work, and people, and Charles Dickens in a lot of his writing really struggled hard to help poor people and labourers, and actually lots of changes were introduced to introduce unions, the labour union, to help the workers at this time. So it may be related to a union at the time, or it may just be the name of the hall.
It makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah, you know, after your explanation, then I think, it makes sense. Union Hall, probably, you know, the organization.
Yeah, the union meeting center.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. All right. So let's go on with another detail that I'm also interested in.
Okay.
For example, you know, when the Inspector Wirt went to a theater to relax and met the key man to the case. Remember the part? Okay, the inspector said that you wouldn't object to a drink. Well, and they went to a public house to continue their conversation. Would you like to talk about this part? Is it a common today that English people use to a drink means to have a drink?
No, today we don't use this expression today, but you would say, we just say, you know, do you want a drink? Do you want a pint? Because we use the measurement a pint, not a litre. Although most drinks, orange juice or milk is now in litres, but for the public house, or we call the pub today, like I think even Taiwan people use the word pub sometimes. We always get drinks in pint glasses, so that when they serve the drink from the barrel or from wherever it is, particularly beer or ale or lager, it's served in pint glasses. Now, most people say, do you fancy a drink? Would you like a drink or a pint? Do you fancy a pint? Or sometimes you say, do you want something stronger? Meaning maybe whiskey or vodka or something else. So it's an old expression we don't use today.
Okay, so if people use this phrase, probably they come from the Victorian age.
I would guess so, yes.
Okay.
I think they probably would do.
Yeah, so speaking of the public house, would you want to explain it a little more? Well,
yeah, this time, I mean, even today, public houses are very important.
Yeah.
It's a meeting place for usually for the local people. I mean, I know some of my family, particularly one of my sisters and her husband, they have their local pub.
Oh, okay.
Public house. Pub is a short word for public house, but we usually today we just say pub.
Yeah.
And they would go there regularly, particularly maybe Friday night or Saturday or on a free day, and they would have lots of friends from the local community would meet there for a drink. And you can even take your children. The children can't drink alcohol.
Yeah.
But their local pub is very nice. It's in the country. You can sit outside on chairs.
Yeah.
And you can have food or snack food. Chips, French fries, some sausage, or even some of the local pub food is very good.
Okay.
At Dickens' time, the pub was actually even more important if you read some of his other stories when they travel out of London. and into the country. Sometimes there weren't so many towns and cities at that time.
Yes.
But so if you're traveling to another place, it was very lonely and dangerous to travel on the roads. So if you could see a pub with the lights of fire, they wouldn't have electricity, but they would have like fire glowing, and you could see them from a distance. You could aim for there, maybe stop for a snack, or even stay overnight.
Oh, really?
Kind of like a B&B bed and breakfast.
Yeah, it's interesting because, Taiwan is a small island. We don't travel so long to meet a place like a public house because, when we go to a city or a town in Taiwan, a lot of stores.
It's everywhere. Taiwan is overcrowded.
Yeah, right.
I mean, even if you go into the mountains, it's difficult to travel a long time.
Right.
Whereas England, even today, particularly further away from London, you go in northern cities or Scotland or Wales, you can travel a long time and have no houses, just go through the countryside.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay, so public house is very important.
Yes.
Or means a lot to the travelers.
Exactly, yes.
Okay. Thank you. All right. And then, in this part, there is a term, have and have, is mentioned. Yeah. And can you explain it? What is have and have?
Well, half and half is an expression, could be half and half of anything. But here, I think they mean, because sometimes the beer is quite strong in England, and sometimes they would mix it with another drink, like an orange juice or a lemonade, something that was a soft drink.
Yeah.
Maybe to not make it so strong. At the time in England, people didn't. Maybe they were just becoming aware of things like boiling water. But water was not very clean in London.
Really?
So people would spend a lot of their time. Well, that time they started just. This is a post-Enlightenment time, so people would already be starting to drink tea and coffee.
Okay.
So they would know that maybe boiling water was probably a better way of drinking water. So half and half, they may have added some water, but today half and half, we often just say a shandy, which is a mixture of the beer, half of the drink is beer, and half the drink is like a lemonade.
Okay, all right. So it won't contain so much alcohol.
Exactly. So you can drink more.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay. So today, what do English people do in the pub? They don't stay overnight there, right?
Well, not so much. There are one or two pubs, I think, maybe one or two still have maybe one or two rooms for rent. It depends. It's not such a big thing now. We have bed and breakfast and other places to stay more often. I mean, but people do eat meals in the pub. It's a popular place. And a lot of the pub, the owners, they're very proud of their cooking.
Okay.
And sometimes it's, there's on TV, sometimes they make shows of different pubs, not just the beer and the alcohol, which is obviously important, but even the cooking. So some of the pub landlords or the owner or even the barman, they'd be very proud of their cooking and their particular type of food. And so, pubs today are not just going to drink, but also to chat, meet friends, and have a meal.
Yeah, really.
I've had meals in pubs and not ordered a drink, maybe ordered a tea or coffee,
so,
and that's fine.
So, let me put it in this way: in each town or in a small city, probably there will be one or two famous pubs for
yeah, in a
people
small
to
town
go,
there will
right?
be 3 or 4. In one of my other sisters lives in a very tiny, very old town called Old Amersham. Many of the houses are older than even Dickens' time,
Really?
400 years old,
Okay.
ancient to Taiwan. And they have many pubs. It's a very small place, just a few thousand people. They have many pubs. So in a big city, I mean, it's actually in the small town, and at Dickens' time, London was much smaller. But each part of London would have pubs for that area.
Oh, really?
Yes. And even going back to Shakespeare's time, a few hundred years before Dickens, they would Shakespeare mentions pubs and public houses, and they're very important kind of meeting places.
Really? Yeah. So I understand. Yeah. A pub means a lot, or
Yes.
you know, a lot of English people have the experience of going to a pub.
Yes,
right?
an important part of the social, life of English people.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. And the next question is, when the inspector learned that the young man's father might know the owner of the gloves, he made up the story to unnerve the young man. Is it common that a group of gentlemen will make a bet on something very trivial after be drunk?
Yeah, they don't have to be drunk. I mean, at that time, there was big divisions between the rich and poor.
Okay.
This is post-industrial, it's post-industrial revolution, or not post, it's really the industrial revolution has been going on and is continuing through, the Victorian era. So there have been massive changes, and people have made a lot of money, like the big, what we call today CEOs, the bosses of the companies, and a lot of the people, just like Charles Dickens himself when he was a young boy, was used, I mean, badly treated. I mean, he, as you know, he left home very young and had to work in a factory in terrible conditions.
Yeah, right.
So he understood the poor people and fought for social change.
Yeah.
Now, the rich people at the time, I mean, originally the English gentlemen were the aristocrats, the knights, the lords, the barons, the dukes, and the princes.
Different ranks. Huh?
Everyone different rank. It's very hierarchical.
Yeah, right.
But at this time, the businessmen and the merchants were making a lot of money, so there were more people with... The rich people had a lot of money, and the poor people were much poorer.
Yeah.
And, yes, it was very common. I mean, they had a lot of money. What did they do with their money? They didn't have many things we have today.
Yeah.
There were no cars, there was no yachts. Okay, there may be nice boats, actually, at that time there were yachts. But they didn't have all the luxury goods we have today.
Yeah.
And part of the gentleman's lifestyle would probably be to bet on different things. They say make a wager, go gambling, play roulette, the popular casino game. Would be just part of their life. Yeah, entertainment. Yeah, part of their... Exactly.
Just for fun.
Yeah, sure.
Okay. All right. So in the later part of the story, a very specific profession is mentioned. Haberdasher. What kind of store is that? And any difference between today and the Victorian age?
Well, yes, haberdasher, we don't say so much today.
Okay.
We still do use it. My school was called Haberdasher's Asks. The name of my school was from the haberdasher. They started this school. Haberdasher was originally someone involved in the clothing industry.
Okay.
Could be, at that time, in the original haberdashers would probably do, from the very beginning, do the tailoring, the pattern cutting, making their own clothes, tailoring, sewing their own clothes, designing their own clothes, and then selling them. obviously at this time mills were growing and material was being started to be mass produced. A lot of the original workers would have lost their jobs, the skilled labourers, because machines were taking over. But the haberdashery industry was still very strong and becoming even richer, because they could fire hundreds of people and implement machinery. So a haberdasher was someone working in the clothing industry, which went from a private personal tailor maybe to a mass-produced, big factory kind of turnout.
Yeah. Do they have their own brand or no?
Possibly, yeah. They would have their own name. They would be called whatever the name was, Asks or Turnbill, or and later in London they were set up in certain streets in London. It'd be common, like in Tainan, there's roads where they have many Wunzadien, the wedding shops.
Right.
They would have streets, like in England, Savile Row is very famous for the famous tailors and haberdashers.
Really?
Yes.
Interesting. Okay, so let's talk about the plot.
Yes.
Do you think the ending is surprising?
Yes, I mean, even though, like you said in the beginning, we never found out. We were sure that Weald was going to catch the murderer because he had the evidence.
Really?
And it was almost, I mean, I think anyone who reads this would be quite sure as we get towards the end the guy had not run away, he was still there. And we have the evidence, everything looks certain. They were going to catch their man who killed, in a horrible way, the girl. But to me, in a way, it didn't matter so much that they didn't catch the person. Obviously, it's very terrible injustice if you don't catch the person. But I think for the story, the plot, it's still a very interesting surprise ending, which I think it works very well.
Yeah, I think it is also a characteristic of the short story.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, if you want to make the short story interesting and eye-catching, then the ending must be a little surprising, and then the reader will, wow, at the end.
Exactly.
Right.
And I mean, Charles Dickens is not famous for short stories. He's famous for these super long novels.
Right.
7, 8, 9, 100, 1,000-page novels. I mean, these are huge books.
Yeah.
So he's got a very good skill also with the short stories. But at the time how they wrote the novels.
Yeah.
How he wrote them in the serial
installments.
Yes.
Yeah. Every day or every week.
Yes. Yeah. So actually, in a way, he had this skill developed, because if you're writing for the public to see what you're writing every week, you have to have some little, catch ending or some little hook, or something to, maybe a bigger one, the cliffhanger that makes the reader want to read more.
Right. Just like an episode in the serious drama on TV.
Yes.
Yeah.
Exactly. And so this was the beginning of the serial. And later now we have a lot of TV dramas. I don't think many of them are as good as Charles Dickens.
Yeah.
But yes, this is, so he's actually working in many different, genre.
And do you think Dickens uses this short story to appropriate and make fun of the detective story tradition, because there are so many coincidences during the investigation? And I think it is also the most interesting part, to let the reader know a detective story is usually made up by a series of coincidences?
Well, I don't know if he was really making fun of this genre, because I think he was one of the beginning, authors in this genre.
Yeah.
But I think possibly, I mean, one of his friends in London at the time was one of the first detectives. And he used to travel around London, walking around late at night with this detective. I think his name was Field. It's a very similar name to Wield. But now he used to because he befriended Charles Dickens, and obviously London at night in those days was not very safe.
Really?
No, because there weren't many police.
Oh.
And people were working all hours, but there were a lot of very dark, dirty alleys, and we didn't have electricity. I think electricity came in maybe at the end of Dickens' life, with Edison and other people. So it would be very dark, and London often was very smoky, cloudy, dirty, and you couldn't see very well, so it was quite a dangerous place to go. So Dickens had a personal like bodyguard almost, with this very experienced police officer, and they would walk around together, and the police officer obviously probably good for him to have someone to talk to and discuss the cases. And I think this is probably a lot from what Charles Dickens saw in his personal experience, and a lot of coincidences do happen.
Oh, really?
In detective cases, yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So finally, let's talk about the style of Charles Dickens by this story. Is it very typical Dickens?
Well, obviously, in one sense, it's not typical because he's not a short story writer as such.
Yeah, I see.
So obviously that is atypical of his writing. Also, he's not famous or really known for being a detective fiction writer.
Yeah.
Although actually in a couple of his big stories there are policemen figure very strongly. One of his famous ones is Detective Bucket, or Inspector Bucket, I forget, but Bucket is a famous one, and a lot of writers later, like Wilkie.
Okay. Let's talk about the style of Dickens by this story. Is it very typical Dickens?
Well, the answer is yes and no.
Okay.
Because in some senses it's typical Dickens, because he uses his very particular detailed way of looking at each character. The descriptions of the character. Obviously it's a short story, so he doesn't go into so much detail. He also is a very good, he knows how to not just capture the reader's attention, but keep the reader's attention,
right?
Which is obviously the most important, one of the most important features in storytelling, whatever you're talking about.
Especially for a popular writer.
Yes, which exactly, Charles Dickens at his time, throughout his life, he was the number one most popular writer.
Right.
You're right, in England and in America almost, even like before Mark Twain or he was really a huge name.
Really?
He was like a superstar.
Right.
Because they didn't have TV or radio.
Yeah.
I mean, people would have to, they would queue up, and even people who couldn't read would queue up to listen every week when his installments came out to his writing. So, he was part of the entertainment at that time. And also many of his stories were converted into plays.
Really?
Some of them, I think he helped even in the script writing of the play.
Yeah, as I know, he is into theater.
Very much.
Right.
Because the
Yeah.
tradition of English literature, like Shakespeare,
Right.
is theatre.
Yeah.
Now, on the other hand, maybe it's not so typical Dickens because he's not famous for detective writing.
Right.
And he's not famous for the short story. But actually Dickens, as I mentioned, one of his close friends was a detective. And he actually used a detective in different novels he wrote.
Okay.
And some of them are very, very famous. I mean, in Bleak House, I mean, it was a story about the lawyers. But the detective was a focal point of maybe not getting angry with the legal bureaucracy and dealing with things in his own way and finding out evidence and thinking about the clues in his own way. I think his Detective or Inspector Bucket, very, very famous. And I think actually, even though Charles Dickens is not famous for this genre, he was one of the first people and probably one of the biggest influences on everyone,
really,
including his protege and friend Wilkie Collins, who wrote one of the famous detective stories of The Moonstone.
Okay.
So difficult to say, exactly typical or atypical, but a very good story nonetheless.
Yeah. Then start from this short story. Then if the readers want to read the novel or fiction of Dickens, what kind of suggestion you will give to the readers?
Well, yeah, I mean, Dickens, all his novels are very long. I mean, I think one of the shortest is the one he was writing when he died, The Mystery of Edwin Drood.
Okay.
And again, we don't know we don't find out the ending because Charles Dickens died.
Yeah.
So he was working till the end of his life. But all his novels are unbelievably long, but have unbelievably wonderful characters.
Yeah.
And you learn characters you sympathize with and characters you hate and characters you're scared of. Because he really brings out the good and the evil of every person. I mean, obviously today you could say it's cheating in a way, but you can watch the movies or even the musicals. I mean, to me, I know people who have read Dickens, they don't even realize that some of the best musicals, like Oliver Twist,
really,
to me is one of the greatest musicals of all time.
Okay.
Oliver Twist is a fantastic production that you can see in the film form.
Yeah.
And it goes in great detail into the novel detail, and the characters of Bill Fagin, the poor boy Oliver, who's an orphan, and Bill Sykes, the evil criminal, who later does terrible things, and the Artful Dodger. They come to life.
Really.
And then other great, I mean, a lot of his books are also the protagonist, the main character, is a child.
Really.
Like Oliver Twist.
Right.
Like
and David Copperfield.
David Copperfield, which, as you say, is his most autobiographical writing. Great Expectations. Pip. Starts as a child. He grows up. So many are children. Little Dorrit is a poor child. And her father's in the debtor's jail, like Charles Dickens' own father. Went to prison because he couldn't pay back money.
Right.
He wasn't evil, he just couldn't pay back the debt. Little Dorrit was a child. So many. So I think you read them, you have this great, like, the protagonist, the star of the story, is really brings you into the story, and you sympathize and empathize, and kind of love that, you know, the lead role, which I think in any of his books is a great thing. And to me, when I start reading any Charles Dickens novels, I have to have time because I can't put them down.
Really?
Yes.
Yeah. But you know, just as you said, you know, his novels are very long.
Yes.
Right. So if the readers are interested in Charles Dickens, probably they can start with the films, movies, or just like you said, the musicals.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Thank you very much.